This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Okay, well, welcome back to Confronting the Line. We are here to explore the world of personal development and examine the often blurry line between transformation and exploitation. We're dedicated to finding that line, looking, listening, and learning in service of a safer seeking for lifelong learners like us. So glad to have everybody back today and glad to have one of my absolute favorite guests and who I affectionately refer to as our resident expert on all things transformational methodology, Ed Gurowitz. Welcome, Ed. Good to see you again.
See you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Ed and I have had so much fun, to be really honest, diving in, mostly starting with Ed's book as the excuse to play and work, right? Transformation from potential to practice. And we'll be talking about that a little bit today. But also, it's just been really great to have Ed on speed dial and say, okay, explain this to me. What's going on here? What about this idea? Wait, is context really decisive? So anyway, I really, really appreciate, Ed, your willingness to jump in. And I want to really remark on, it's not normal. You are literally of hundreds of senior, certainly landmark forum-est leaders, there's hundreds over the 50-year trajectory. You are one of very, very few who have actually waded in and been willing to come to the line and look. And confront what is helpful, what's harmful, what can we look back across 50 years and say we should keep and what should we throw out? Where did we go as leaders, teachers, facilitators? Where did we go wrong? Where did we get entrapped in our own mythology is how it occurs for me now. So today I wanted to
Could I just say something about that?
Yeah, please.
One of the things that I've been focused on for a while, especially with the advent of AI, but it reaches back to transformational methodologies as well. These are tools. They're not an end in itself. They're not the goal. So any tool, you can use a hammer to build a house. You can use a hammer to hit somebody in the head. So it's very important that we recognize that any tool, however good it is, when it's used for its designed purpose, can be used destructively. And that's certainly true about AI. It's certainly true about transformational methodologies. It's true about religion. It's true about almost anything.
Well, and I would add to that you can't, what I've noticed is this unwillingness to look at the weaponization or the misuse of the tools. And that's where the culty piece comes in for me, because it kind of is the only thing that really explains why people are so utterly threatened. People meaning leaders or acolytes or long time devotees of the methodology of those tools. When you're unwilling to consider that it could be harmful, you're in dangerous territory. Like that just by itself is a red flag for any person. If you're not willing to go, and or you find yourself going like, okay, I got it, but that person, that's why I don't talk too much about Werner per se and what I call his abusive proclivities, because I think that's a distraction actually. I think that if it would be a problem for the future of transformational work, of personal development work, if we were able to go, well, that was just so-and-so, that was Werner, that was Keith Raniere, that was L. Ron Hubbard, and those were just crazy bad guys, and that they're gone or they're out of the picture, we're all safe. No. Those people honestly got sucked in different ways and expressed, and perpetrated, as it were, in different ways. But there's not any of us that couldn't do that.
Here's the thing. If someone's getting paid to use a tool, the old expression, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
Well, if you're getting paid to provide the tool, everything is going to look like it needs that tool, whether it does or not, or whether it might be harmful or not. So
are you saying that that motivation of the money in the background is kind of takes control in a way of our behavior?
Money's recognition.
Okay. Yeah.
So
attention.
It's really, so for example, for some people, you mentioned Hubbard, you mentioned Werner, Tony Robbins, others, the fact that they're famous, that they're recognized. Plus, they've made a ton of money. Uh, but the recognition is what they're in it for, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah,
For
I think so too.
somebody who's working at the staff level in Landmark, they're not getting the recognition, but they're at least they've staked their livelihood on selling the tool. If I sell Cutco knives, I'm not going to go out and sell Henkel's. I'm going to talk about how good Cutco is.
Well, there's more than just livelihood. I kind of have to chuckle a little internally because they pay staff so horribly, you
I
can
know,
barely
but it's still their
subsist.
only source of income because they don't have time to have any other
Yeah, but
job.
I think that it's got an even deeper hook. You know, someday in the near future, you, me, and Chris Shelton are going to get on and talk about his new REM model, which he's very excited about. I'm equally excited about. I think he really nails it because, especially at that sort of staff program leader kind of, let's call it mid-level management, right? So in the mid-level management, you have not only your livelihood, you have your reputation because you've now, proselytized this thing is the answer. And you need to maintain that for yourself, for your own ego structure, your own sense of self. But then also, because it's so high control and so all encompassing, your entire community.
You just wrote a really good newsletter in the Illuminate newsletter on cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
The
I'll wait till
more
part 2 coming out this
recognition,
week.
the more ego investment there is, the greater the cognitive dissonance if you're challenged.
Yes.
And when you get to
Yes.
program leaders, remember when I was there, maybe it's different now. Other than forum leaders, program leaders didn't get paid. Oh, and communication course leaders, program leaders didn't get paid. So that's pure recognition. You are now within that community. You're a hero because forum leaders, trainers come and go, but the seminar leaders are there in
Yes.
the community. So
The other
you and I were talking offline about ego structures. It creates an artificial ego structure that you can hang your identity on.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I mean, I've really come to see that so much for myself. I mean, and those that have read my book kind of know my basic backstory. I was a teen mom living on my own since I was 16, didn't have the opportunity to get a formal education and pursue the kind of career opportunities I probably would have had I not been a teen mom and been a single mom raising a child. But all of those things, so when I come along and I find this thing, because there's another ingredient that I think is so essential, and I was just talking to a former staff member that we're hopefully going to do some interviews with. She's just has such a brilliant perspective on this. The other thing is you can make a difference. You can matter. You can have a purpose-filled life. And I'm kind of on a little bit of I get on these tangents. And one of my current tangents is I'm on a bit of a tangent against purpose. And what I mean by that is this false sense of purpose, this something external to myself that gives me validation, that gives me that gives me a sense of doing good. And nobody's been more shocked than me over the last year to come to understand how that could be used to manipulate me, how that could be used to exploit me.
Especially if the exploiter doesn't focus on the individual's purpose, but on some grand purpose of saving the world.
Yes. Okay, that's good.
So that the individual, in fact, the individual's purpose gets sacrificed. Never, you don't matter. It's the world. We're saving the world. How you feel doesn't matter. That you got abused doesn't matter. It was for a good cause. We're saving the world.
I was just remarking on that with this person, like, that's how we get talked into sacrificing. I mean, look at you. You had a successful, private practice as a neuropsychologist. You were teaching in a university and whatnot, and you give all that up. For those of you that don't know Ed's story, go back to it's like the first or second or third episode really early on with Ed. I've now created a playlist on the YouTube channel that calls Conversations with Ed. Go back and listen. But you sacrifice that for making a difference, for being a part of this thing. And it was way more intoxicating when you jumped in than when I jumped in, because you jumped in the era when it was like famous. They were referring to it on sitcoms and it was very much in the pop culture fame. When I jumped on, it was this obscure thing still, right? And I'm still actually kind of grateful for this, to be honest, because there's elements of it that I think I've definitely benefited from, but it gave me a way, a structure to be engaged in that kind of difference making and that sense of confidence. Where it's been a problem is as the years go by, you start to realize the falseness of it. You start to realize that it's not that you're not making a difference individual by individual, conversation by conversation, but you're not changing the world. And in fact, the world isn't asking for that. The world doesn't care. And all we have to do, I had somebody say to me recently, they're like, oh, if everybody would just do the Landmark Forum. I said, well, they've had 3.5 million people. It doesn't seem to have made much of an impact. I mean, that's by their own numbers. And I actually, well, I think those numbers as direct customers are probably could likely be overinflated. Who knows? I don't know. It's not that big of a number if you stretch it across 50 years. But there's lots of the thinking that was brought forward through the S training, through the forum, through the Landmark Worldwide has really spread. And so this is actually a good segue into what we wanted to talk about today. So it's really spread out in all these ways, including through our organizations, through all kinds of, through our, not-for-profits and NGOs and, that kind of what I call the human potential methodology, the human potential kind of movement of that era has become, honestly, the norm. I think there's some problems in that methodology. And as you well know, because we talk about them all the time, but we'll get to that. We'll start to examine that more deeply. Right now, we've been really just focused on recognizing the abuse and exploitation when we see it, because we don't, and then we keep signing up for more, or we justify it exactly how you just said. Well, so those staff members can barely afford to live. They don't have a retirement. Well, their health, I mean, the health of former staff members is deplorable. But it was all it's okay to sacrifice in service of a greater purpose. And I would love to see that go away. I don't think it's true. And I'd love to see us evolve beyond that.
Well,
It can happen.
that way predates any of the stuff we're talking about. I mean,
Sure does.
Religious orders have always held sacrifice. Some religious orders have always held sacrifice to the point of asceticism. You go back to the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are people who lived in the deserts, on next to nothing, in the name of sacrificing themselves for a greater good. There is something to be said for that if it's done. What's the phrase they use in medicine? Blocking on it. Informed consent. If it's done with informed consent.
Yeah, but really?
You're lied to get you to do it.
Yeah,
That's
but
not informed consent.
Yeah, but I'm not so sure about that, because let's look at this. So first of all, so legally, I was surprised to find this out. And I found this out as I was working with the people who were trying to get the actual physical, abuse to stop. And one of the things an attorney explained to me is that you can't actually consent to assault or abuse, that in the legal domain, that's why we have, like, the state will hold perpetrators, predators to account. The victims aren't usually the one. The state does it on behalf of the victims, because a lot of victims, they say it takes 7 to 10 years to even actually be able to recognize that you were assaulted or that you were abused. So I'm kind of a little skeptical even about, informed consent would be a nice upgrade.
Well,
No problem.
But it's circular, because if I'm into BDSM, I can
Right.
consent to be beaten, whipped, whatever. It doesn't become assault until I don't consent, until it's done without my consent. So by definition, if there's consent, it's
So would
not
the
assault.
consent need to be explicit? So, because this was one of the conversations I had with some of the Werner staffers that were coming to me for help. I said, well, what we were always, we saw you guys being verbally berated, and, that was common. We didn't see the physical stuff, but we saw the verbal. And we were pretty much told that you consented to that as a form of training. And it was implied for sure in the showing of what's that tape? The Full Metal Jacket. Right. So that was kind of how I excused it anyway. I'm like, well, they consented. I wouldn't consent to that. In fact, when Werner asked me, he goes, you should be on my staff. And I'm like, I would never do that, because I won't consent to the way you run a staff. I called it hostile. It was hostile. And then I was quite surprised when I I actually did ask some of those folks that were coming to me. I said, did you guys actually consent to be screamed at, to be, as they started to actually tell me the details of the behavior? And they said, No. Nor did they consent to the pay refunds, by the way. They
No,
consent
that was
after the
all
fact. It starts to
after the
happen,
fact.
and then
Exactly.
they're given a
Exactly right.
rationalization.
If somebody joins the Marines, they know what they're getting into, and they're told what they're getting into. They know they're going to be broken down as part of boot camp. That's consent. If you break somebody down and then say that was for your own good, that there's a technical term, that's bullshit.
Yeah. Gotcha. Interesting. Okay, well, let's trip on over to what I wanted to spend some time with you today, which is, so, Landmark itself and organizations like it, Context, Insight, there's a bazillion of them, LifeSpring, blah, blah, blah. And then there's even more, but they do what's personal transformation, right? So that's open enrollment, personal transformational courses. When you left or got booted or however that went from I call it the WWW, Wacky World of Werner. So when you left the WWW and you went, as I understand, maybe you should tell us exactly how that went. You kind of immediately sort of went into more of a corporate training or business or organizational training domain. Can you tell us a little bit about your transition? Actually, let's just start there into that world from the personal, you were a trainer kind
I
of.
was a trainer and a forum leader, co-led the 6-day, trained seminar leaders, the whole 9 yards. In 1990, when how shall we say it, the excrement impacted the cooling device and Werner left the country and released, that it was before he released this from our word. No, it was right around then. I was asked, I had gone a year before over to Technico, which was the management consulting arm. And I was there basically as Werner's representative to make sure, because they had turned the organization over to non-Landmark people. There was a new CEO, there was a new program director. The only Landmark people directly involved were myself, and I was there. I don't even remember if I had a title. I was there to make sure they didn't screw up the methodology.
And this was
Barbara
what was
Stevenson was there as a
Technico?
lawyer.
Yeah.
Say again?
Okay. So this was Technico. So you're leaving essentially what is Werner Earhart and
Went on
Associates.
leave from Landmark, or at that
Okay.
time it was.
Doesn't become Landmark till 1991. So
Yeah, no, this time there was a transitional name. It was
transnational.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was on leave from there. I was still a forum leader. I still led the forum once or twice a year. But my main job was with Technico. And in fact, my wife and I were planning to move to Boston because as part of the separating it from Werner, Technico had been moved to headquarters had been moved to Boston.
And at this point, did you know internally that Werner was going to be leaving the country and the organization? Because I know that didn't.
He left in 90.
The end of 90. And just as a side note, because I'm dying of curiosity, and I'm sure some of our listeners are, is what were you guys told about why he left at that time?
He was under attack.
Okay.
From Scientology. There was the 60 Minutes character assassination as we held it. His daughter had accused him of sexual abuse, etc. So he was getting out of the country to avoid being assassinated, but also when it came to Technico, the idea, it was explicitly to distance him from Technico.
Okay.
In
And
fact,
what was the reasoning for that, you think?
corporations didn't want anything to do with it. There had been instances of people in corporations getting sued. There was a farmer's market in Atlanta. I want to say Atlanta. I think that's right. Might have been New Orleans, but I'm pretty sure it was Atlanta. Where it was almost all the people who worked there were Korean, and the owner of the market made them force them, at the risk of losing their position, to do the forum. And they sued because they said it went against their religious beliefs. So a number of the affiliates, and especially there was one very powerful affiliate in Houston, who one of the partners is very close to Werner, and he, at his wife's urging, orchestrated the whole distancing of Technico from Werner. So I was at Technico from late 90, early 91 through June of 91, Technico was supposedly being dissolved, and my job became to sell off the licenses in perpetuity to the license holders,
Okay.
which all but one license holder did. One license holder insisted on still identifying as transformational technologies. They had never actually signed on to Technica. So, in any case, when I left, so Technico supposedly dissolved.
Okay.
I came back to being a forum leader, and at that point in June or July of 91, we were basically the forum leaders were basically told, here's the deal, Werner's not here anymore, which we knew. Werner had released us from our word. We had given our word for life. Werner had released us, which is great. So we were all there. We weren't bound by anything but our own commitment. So I, for one, was told I was going to have to take a very substantial pay cut. I was getting paid very little as a forum leader and something more than very little at Technico. I wasn't getting rich by any means, but it was about a 30% pay cut to go
Okay.
back to my old salary as a forum leader and go back on the road leading the forum. And we were to basically give our word all over again, except this time not to Werner, but to each other. I'm not sure. Well, I can't remember the exact number now. I think it was 15. It might have been 25 of us left
Okay.
at that point. Several had already left when Werner left, 2 or 3. Pardon me. About 15 of us, maybe 20 of us left right after that. We called them forwards because forum
Yes.
leaders don't retreat, including some of the guys who had been there the longest. I say guys, women too. So in the meantime, I had negotiated a termination agreement with Technico, which was amazingly favorable toward me because the person negotiating with me, I won't name names here, fundamentally didn't know what they were doing. So actually, it wasn't even that. They were sure, they gave me the rights to what was called the Executive Excellence Program,
Okay.
which was a program for executives using transformational methodologies. And they gave me a technical license
Okay.
in perpetuity.
All right.
What that did was it gave me full license to use everything in the body of knowledge that was the forum and the communication course and everything else. The plan was for me to fail. And this person who was in the consulting firm that was so close to Werner and all that, this was largely his plan. He backed me. He gave me a line of credit to start my own consulting firm, figuring I would fail. Well, I didn't. And the contract had in fact, I was quite successful, especially with revising the Executive Excellence Program, which we may get into in another context. The point is, the contract had a clause in it that I could, after, I think it was a year, maybe it was 2, I don't remember, I could buy them out for a certain amount, maximum, I don't remember. The point is, I made it. I got it. I got someone else backing me, another partner, bought them out, and now I'm out there with full use of everything. They threatened to sue me. That didn't work. Finally, they just decided to leave me alone.
You told me once about this like $10,000 kind of known buyout. Does that play in there? Anything about
No, it's not a known buyout. They have sued a lot of people, some of them personal friends of mine, and others people I knew from the day who came to me because they knew that I had successfully gotten Landmark to not sue me and I didn't pay them. What I discovered was that the going rate to get them to go away was about $10,000.
I gotcha.
That was never anything formal. It was never a price. It was, we'll settle
Just kind
with
of
you.
I mean, something becomes a thing by virtue of happening a number of times,
Exactly. And
right?
it happened to
Yeah.
at least 2 people that I know for sure, and several others that I'm quite sure. And there were others who, I'll say with my help, got Landmark to go away without paying them off the way I did.
Yeah, there's quite a landmark diaspora, as it were, of former leaders who are networked together, and there's sharing of information in ways to debunk completely the idea that those ideas are uniquely theirs. Mike Jensen used to say to me all the time, "You can own the words on a page. That's what copyright is, but you can't own ideas."
Right, and if you read my book, I trace almost all the ideas back to their original source.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing I love about your book is you actually give a much less word salady way in which to work with the ideas. It's less convoluted and masked up. So, okay, interesting. So then you left the organization. You start your own practice, as it were, doing the transformational work or transformational distinctions or tools, maybe I think is probably a good word. Technology we have debunked. We'll do a separate thing about why it's not a technology that in organizations. And so tell us a little bit about how that goes in the beginning. How your personal story is so fascinating, and there's lots of lessons available in it.
Before I went to California, I did the training in '78, very quickly fast-tracked to be what was then called a guest seminar leader, now an introduction to the forum leader, then a graduate seminar leader. And in the meantime, I had a practice, as you alluded to. I had a psychology therapy practice in Vermont. I moved it to Boston. I moved my family and me to Boston to be closer to the center. And I established a practice in Boston. It was going okay. My practice in Vermont had been very successful, and people in Boston, through the network and otherwise, I was building a practice in Boston. Part of that, through some people I was associated with, included working with organizations. Just the beginning of I'd started that in Vermont because there was a big IBM facility near where I lived, and a lot of my clients in therapy were IBM executives and their families. I was doing group and family therapy at the time, and IBM was a good client base because in those days, the joke was that IBM stood for I've been moved. And so this put a lot of stress on their families, and so I worked with them, and some of them asked me, could I do this with their teams at work? Now, I have a character flaw. I can't say no. Uh,
I can relate to that.
I've always loved the story John F. Kennedy used to tell about, you know, little boys in Ireland who would be running around in the fields and throw their hat over a wall that they didn't think they could get over, and then they'd have to get over to get their hat because you didn't come home without your hat. Well, that for me, that was me throwing my hat over the wall. Sure, I'll work with your work team. What the hell do I know? And it
Well,
was
and
successful.
that's one of the things I would say the human potential sort of trainings, as it were. I think that's one of the benefits. That's one of the helpful things is you do gain the kind of confidence to go, well, sure, I can, because it's embedded in this idea that I can invent a possibility that doesn't exist and then pursue it. Right. Now, that's not unique just to human potential, but it's definitely the foundational things. When you work in these now, the dark side of that is we often also don't understand boundaries very well and will tend to go over too far and
Yes,
create
and there's
harm to
another
ourselves
emotion.
and others in our pursuit.
Originally, Transformational Technologies, then Technico, consisted of a whole lot of people, seminar leaders, etc., whose only tool was what they got in the forum and or the training and in seminars. They had no qualification. Now, I want to be clear, there were people who were highly qualified. There was a professor from the Darden Business School. So there were highly qualified
There's
people.
some in there that have qualifications outside of that lexicon, right?
My
Like
only
yourself, I
qualification
mean,
was as a psychologist, but this wasn't the first time I had done that. I had originally been trained in brain research, what's now called neuroscience, neuropsychology, and jumped from that into clinical psychology and was self-taught. I did lots of training courses, but I never took anything in school. I traded off the fact that I had a PhD in psychology to get on the New York State civil service as a psychologist, and that gave me lots of time and opportunity to train myself. So this was another example of that.
One
Anyhow,
Go ahead.
so I moved to Boston and with two other people, one guy that both of whom I knew through EST. One was did actually have experience as a business consultant, and the other was a former commander in the Navy. And together we took on some small business corporate clients down in Boston. And then after a year in Boston, I moved to the West Coast to go to work in Werner's office. So
Oh, really? Okay, so this Boston thing is happening, and so this isn't happening in the
80,
early
81,
90s. So this is before. Okay,
80,
gotcha.
81.
One little thing I want to tie up before we go too far off into the corporate realm, that you said, a little thread, is that you were sort of assigned to the Technico organization at that time, which now that organization is a part of Landmark. Landmark later goes and buys. The amount of times that they have bought and sold each other to each other is stunning. And the main winner in every one of those transactions is Werner Erhard, just to be clear, near as I can tell.
That goes back way before, that goes back to the 70s.
Yeah. I mean, I even talk about it in my book, how the Being a Leader course, I think I'm part of this big mission. We're going to develop this program that introduces ontological, phenomenological forms of educating into academia, and we're going to give it away and da 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 da. And then, years later, I find out, yeah, but he also sold it to Technico. But you mentioned that when you went over to Technico, they were closing it down. It's not closed. It's alive and well today. I believe they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 some paying.
I sold the license in perpetuity on the premise, which I believed. I wasn't consciously, I was being lied to, so I ended up lying to people. That license in perpetuity was going to be, there aren't going to be any more. So pay how many thousands of dollars to hold this license, which now belonged to, I think it was 45 firms, and there aren't going to be any more. Well, that ain't what happened.
What happened as far as you know?
But, here's the thing. I have a theory, which I've yet to see disproved, which is that how something starts is how it goes. So if you go back to the beginning, there was a man named Harry Margolis. Harry Margolis was a lawyer, and he was brilliant.
Was he a lawyer or a CPA?
Lawyer.
Okay.
He may have also been a CPA for all I know, but he set up a whole mess of offshore interlocking companies to avoid taxes for Werner.
Is the real reason he left the country, by the way. The IRS was pursuing.
No, not really, because the IRS then publicly absolved him of any wrongdoing.
I understand, but when he leaves, he's being sued by the IRS because I have these documents now. The IRS is actually after Harry Margolis, and they're trying to get at him through his clients, of which Werner was one.
So anyhow, that was how it started. It started with a base of Hall of Mirrors.
Transformational mafia is what I call it.
Okay.
The structure, a lot of that structure still exists today.
Yeah. So, it's not surprising that when Technico ostensibly shut down, it didn't shut down. But what it did do was relieve the organization no longer needed a superstructure to make sure everything was kosher with the licensees. Now they held the license in perpetuity. There was no more juice to be squeezed from that particular lemon. So they got left alone, unless they went too far, or unless they were, for example, a former forum leader who then, they would threaten to sue. And the going rate, as I understood it, not officially, but what it took to get them to go away was around $10,000.
Gotcha. Well, Technico exists today.
Yeah.
When you're in the organization, you're not supposed to say that word or name out loud, which is fishy all by itself. That was one of
Which word?
Technico.
Quirks.
Really? Oh, yeah. No. I got in trouble one time for saying it. I was told by the person who works at Landmark, who's accountable for Technico, not to use that word, not to put it in print or say it. So Technico, no longer. bound by any of that. But yeah, it's interesting. And I don't know any the details and don't really care, honestly, but somewhere around 95, 96, somewhere in there, there's a whole purchase and sale. There's a lot of purchasing that goes on back and forth, back and
Yeah,
forth.
no,
And
no,
of
no.
course,
Yeah.
it's all kept high. The only way you find out about it is when somebody sues, which is pretty often.
Uh,
And then it becomes a part of a complaint or becomes a part of well, they never really let their lawsuits get as far as discovery. So that's why, folks, if Landmark ever threatens to sue
no,
you,
they
just
did.
get
There were
to,
a couple of cases where they did.
yeah,
I was an
yeah.
expert witness on one where someone, I won't say names, sued Landmark
Mm.
for using their IP, the person's IP,
Oh, that's
and won.
great. Yeah.
Settled, but settled in their favor. And that one, I sat through some very uncomfortable depositions.
I bet. Look, I believe people, companies, and artists, as it were, should be allowed to own their IP. But organizations like Landmark, because they're certainly not alone in this by any stretch, they tend to exaggerate what is their IP. And that
Well,
was the point
look
that,
up an article of mine called, it's probably on my website. It's called Intellectual Property is Intellectual Theft. And it's probably on Medium because I wrote it quite a while ago
we'll
when I was
link it
writing
in
for
the
Medium.
yeah, we'll link it in the show notes. That's great. Okay, so all right, enough Landmark trivia. Sorry, that's our little side gig there. So there you
You're gonna have a lot of fun editing this.
yes. So then we go. So, but at a certain point, you break your time with the WWW, Landmark, whatever it is at that point. It becomes Landmark about 1991. You're free of all that, and then you start working in organizations. Anything you want to kind of tell
I'll
us?
resume working.
You resume working in organizations. Yeah. So anything you want to say about kind of how
Well,
that goes?
one of the, as I said, one of the parts of my termination with Technico was that I got the rights to the Executive Excellence Program. Now, this was a program that was originally called Center for Management Design, and I still call my company that,
Mm.
the part of my company that put on that program. But then it became called Executive Excellence. Werner had done a program at IBM in 1985, and it was at a time when IBM realized they had missed the boat on the personal computer market. Now, this is one of those massively bad corporate decisions that you realize too late. And they wanted to go from a standing start to a sprint in the personal computer market. Graduate, who was an executive at IBM, brought Werner in, and he did this program. It was 8 weeks long. It was 2 weeks at a time, 4 times in a year. And IBM was very happy with it. They paid a lot of money for it, and they were very happy with it. And I'm told it worked. I don't know enough about IBM to know for sure, but I've always been told, including by
They
people in
always claim it
IBM, that it
works.
worked.
With they, meaning anybody who forwards these, always claims it works, and there's virtually no
Well,
evidence.
IBM got into the personal computer market in a big way, and until they sold their PC line to Lenovo in China, they did very well with the IBM ThinkPad. So I'm
That
not
was a
going to
computer
argue.
I was given when I went on staff until I
The
turned it
point
in
is
for a Mac.
they continued then, Technico continued putting on that program, fueled by technical affiliates who would send their clients, technical licensees, I should say, who would send their clients. And, BP was a client. I'm talking major clients. Well, when I left Technico and I now owned that program, there was one in progress in San Francisco. And so I went and sat in to see what was going on. Nobody can believe this when I tell them. The people leading the program, who were graduate seminar leaders and, the other part of their life, were literally reading the transcript of Werner at IBM in 1985. When I say literally reading, I mean they would address people like, "Hey, Fred, you think that's funny?" There's no Fred in the room. Fred was in the IBM program, and they're reading this thing like it's a
This
script.
is one of the culty aspects. Like, people ask me, like, why do you call it a cult? This is exactly why. Because you have to recreate dear leader, essentially, until you are passed by whoever's qualified to pass you, that you have recreated dear leader enough that you can declare yourself as having now inhabiting that personality, that knowing, that whatever. This is part of the
Well, and as long as
culty structure.
licensees were putting people in the program, there was no oversight.
No.
As long as the program continued. Now, this is a program that costs $40,000 plus expenses and took 8 weeks of an executive's life in the course of a year. So it was not doing well by the time I got there in 1991. So first of all, I took over and fired all the leaders. I took the program and revamped it completely, updated the methodology, because this is now 8, 9 years later. There was new.
So we can place it, what year are we in now?
92.
92. Okay, good.
And I shortened it to 4 one-week sessions and lowered the price to $25,000 plus expenses. Now, it still costs an organization between $75,000 and $100,000, just real money laid out, plus the opportunity cost of losing a top executive for 4 weeks out of the year. But 4 weeks is better than 8 weeks, and the program delivered breakthrough results. See, and at that point in time, we didn't talk about organizational transformation. We talked about breakthrough results and breakthrough outcomes, and defined that as something that alters what's possible for the organization going forward into the future. Now, once I began to work on it, I started working on organizational transformation, as were a number of other people. Tracy Goss, who wrote The Last Word on Power, was one of the top people in that. Loretta Melandro, who was never herself, I mean, she did the training, but she was never in the organization, but everybody who worked for her was, or almost everybody. So there was a building movement toward what I call in my book and others have called organizational transformation. Tracy called it executive reinvention. Now, here's to the point. There were 2 ways of doing it. Tracy's way was she worked with individual executives in a group setting, but worked on individual transformation, personal transformation.
Okay.
And then the executive would go back to the company as a champion for transformation in the organization. And certain companies, one company whose products you buy at the supermarket, for example, sent I don't know how many executives through. A large supermarket chain in the Midwest that I work with very extensively sent a huge number of people through.
Okay, so this is really good. So this
Let
is
me just finish.
go ahead. Yeah.
And then, so Loretta Melandro is an example of this, as were others. There were people who worked at the organizational level. They were about co-creating with top executives an organizational transformation. Now, I can't say one's better than the other. I can say that that using the individual to organization rather than organization to organization
Okay.
is slower and requires a lot more people. It requires a critical mass. One of the things, and I learned a lot about this working with Loretta, is you can systematize things much better, much more effectively, working at the organizational level from the beginning. And what will happen is individual transformation will come along.
Okay, so tell me what constitutes, just right in that thread, what would you say constitutes or equals personal transformation? And organizational? So I'd love to hear from both.
Well, okay. For an individual, personal transformation, it's a shift in the locus of where you locate yourself, your identity, who you are, from content, being the content, part of the content of your life, to being the context in which your life happens. Now, that's purely theoretical. You get down to it, Practically, what it means is discovering, first of all, that your life has been built around a survival strategy that you formed when you were about 4 years old, give or take. And I go into this in great detail in chapter 2 of my book. It's what I call the perfect storm. Little kids can't think abstractly. They only think concretely. The brain is wired to detect threat, and it's very good at it. And as Eric Byrne, another of my teachers, said, every child by the time they're about 4 years old has to answer the question, what do I have to do to survive around here? Well, what they do is they form a survival strategy to the extent that a 4-year-old is capable of forming a strategy, and then that gets refined over the years so that by the time you're an adult, a 4-year-old is running your life and you don't know it because you've actually turned it into, in most cases, you've turned it into a very effective strategy. These people I'm working with, they're executives, highly paid, highly accomplished, highly respected, especially the CEOs I work with. And yet they're still operating off of proving that they're smart or proving that they're good enough or whatever. It's just they've found a way to make it work for them.
Well, you do an excellent job in your book, which folks, you should definitely get Ed's book, public service announcement here, Transformation from Potential to
For
Practice.
you, it's a public service announcement. For me, it's shameless promotion.
Okay. For me, it's a public service announcement. If you are somebody who wants to understand transformational methodologies beyond how you may have been exposed to them in whatever organization, which will claim total ownership. So Landmark claims total ownership of their tech. But if you're listening and you're hearing Ed talk, you can hear like, no, their tech is based in long, held ideas. And then now I can already hear the Landmark defenders going, yes, of course, Werner took all these great ideas and organized it in a unique way. Well, I call kind of bullshit on that. Yes, sort of, kind of. And Werner is definitely shrewd and a very smart man. I worked with him and I have respect for that. But he also, one of the smartest things he did is surround himself with people like Ed Gurowitz and many other very, very smart people. And then they sit around and have these conversations, and then it gets put together into a distinction that becomes intellectual property that gets sold. So, but it's all based in very long held ideas. And that's what I loved about your book. That's why I say it's a public service announcement. If you really want to understand the ideas, Ed's book's not the only book, but it's a good place to start because you really simplify it. So personal transformation.
I'm going to say this. So far, mine is the only book that actually traces it back to its source, small s, materialist, where the ideas came from.
Right. And gives you a way to use them.
Have like Tracy's book is brilliant. Loretta's books are brilliant, but they're their formulation of
right, rather than the explanation of the formulation.
Mine is meant to be a exposition of transformational methodology, not as I see it, but as it has developed from what Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy.
Okay, well, this is really important. So shameless plug for upcoming thing. I just told Ed the other day, I said, I want to actually host, we'll see what form it takes. It'll probably come out somewhere around November, December, but want to host a program membership, something for consultants, coaches, and trainers that want to actually use this work, understand it, and use it in healthy and safe and ethical ways, which is my bent.
I only answered half your question.
Yeah, exactly.
So personal transformation has to do with reclaiming one's authentic self, senior to the survival strategy, so that you now have choices outside the bounds of the survival strategy.
Okay. You're not limited by those strategies.
Exactly right.
Which, by the way, just want to hearken shout out to Glenn Doyle, who's kind of my resident trauma expert, who actually talks about trauma recovery very similarly, that trauma, which I'm going to give that the category of really dramatic and drastic happenings that impact a person's emotional, spiritual, and physical safety. That's kind of how I think of trauma. But we develop strategies or conditions for surviving that trauma and staying safe, not getting hurt. And they work, actually, to the degree to which they work. My daughter was still harmed in ways, but she developed strategies and they worked. They got her through childhood. And then but at a certain point, and the thing with trauma is it cements those strategies in really strong, really, really deep.
That's
And
the thing.
so
That's the
then
thing.
so
That's the
then now here we are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Trauma does not age well. It's not the incident, it's the strategies, it's the conditioning
and it's
that we
something else.
learned.
It's also the triggering aspect of it.
Say more about that.
Well, everybody's survival strategy has triggers. Okay? If I'm in a room full of smart people, I have to really watch that I don't try to show up like the smartest person in the room. That's my
I have to
survival.
not help. Mine is a helper.
Yeah.
I have to
So,
not save
but
people.
with trauma, because it's so cemented in and because it was formed on, see, 90% of the time, the threat that a 4-year-old experiences isn't real. Okay, it's not a real threat. Now, the amygdala, the part of the brain that is a threat detector, doesn't care. The amygdala doesn't care if that's a stick or a snake; it's going to run away. And if it doesn't do that, chances are those people didn't pass down their genes. But with trauma, the threat, it wasn't just a threat; it was actual damage, actual harm,
Yeah,
physical or emotional,
right,
or both. And so the trigger, it's a hair trigger. So
right.
so the minute you go after that, see, I used to try to make sure nobody who was severely what we called mentally ill, but really traumatized, did the training or the forum because they're just going to get re-traumatized. Their defenses are too good. It takes somebody like Glenn, and I'd love to talk with Glenn about this at length, but it takes somebody like Glenn who can with it without re-traumatizing people or
Yeah.
only minimally re-traumatizing it to get past it. Now, you asked about organizational transformation. The difference, organizational transformation is entirely relational.
Okay.
I quote in my book, and I wrote an article as well on Substack when I was working with Mickey Connolly, who's another ex Landmark guy who really got away from it. Mickey specializes in communication. We were working. He was actually on this project with a group of engineers from a company. It was HP. I think he even says it in his book. He identifies it. They were building a new plant in Ireland, and they were behind schedule and over budget. And he surveyed 40 engineers and asked them what percent of their issues that were slowing things down were social and what percent were technical. His engineers
Wow.
said 81% were social.
Hmm.
Interpersonal would be another way to say social.
Yeah.
You know, that I've never forgotten that, and that was back in, I think, 98 or something. But what it pointed me to with regard to organizational transformation is the relational nature of it. It's got I tell company I work with after 50 years in this business, I've worked with I don't think there's an industry I haven't worked in.
Okay.
And I tell them, I'm not going to tell you anything about how to run the technical side of your business. You've forgotten more about that than I'm ever going to know. And that's true in every business, including businesses like retail, where I have a lot of background. But what's in the way of high performance? What's in the way of transforming the possibility that your organization is living into, whether it's being the biggest, being the best, being the most profitable, being the nicest, doesn't matter. It's all interpersonal. So where it's personal transformation, I can work with an individual. It's called coaching, and I do it a lot. And I can work with them for years, and they'll completely alter what's possible for them once they see the world outside their winning strategy, their survival strategy. With organizations, I work interpersonally almost entirely, so that
Mm.
I'll get an executive team, CEO and their direct reports, together for 4 days, 5 days. And a lot of the work we do is on How do you listen to each other? How do you communicate? You know, how about trust, about partnership, about collaboration? Because just like individuals have their survival strategy, organizations have what I call a default culture. It's grown up over thousands of years. It's based
Right.
primarily in the Roman army,
Right.
which was the first, I believe, the first military of its size. Maybe it's
Hmm.
based in Alexander the Great. I don't know, but it's that era where they had large militaries spread out over wide territory with no means of communication.
Right.
So if every person at the top of each branch, each army wasn't singing from the same songbook, you would have chaos. So it would have developed a structure called command and control. And you see it in today's military, less so than it used to be, unless you talk about the Air Force, where it's virtually not even there. It's in the church, especially the Catholic Church, but all churches, any church that has a hierarchy.
Well, it's making a big resurgence too. You're seeing these big movements like back to do it the way the Romans do it. And what's interesting, I just listened to an interview, sidebar, Chris Shelton and John Atack, really good interview. I encourage folks to go over to Chris Shelton's channel and take a listen to them talking about John's new book, which John got deep into exploring Nazism and the ties between Aryan thinking and that kind of thinking and what's happening in our society today. But one of the points that they make in that conversation that I was particularly struck by is there is actually thousands of years of and historical evidence and record of societal organization and structure that did not have war, that had 700 years of no war, no conflict. There are other ways of, let's call it organizing societal systems and structures. We are a interdependent social species. So we're always going to be living in some kind of an organizational structure. We live as a joined organism. We're not one of my passions is exposing this whole bullshit thing about hyper individualism and that I can completely survive as an individual. None of us are surviving as an individual. That has nothing to do with my, precious essence, my presence as a being. That's something else in a spiritual context. But I'm talking about our survival systems, organizational systems. And it's interesting because the whole Roman thing is like having a bit of a renaissance. And yet it's had some incredibly destructive outcomes. We can look, same with our religious structures. We've had, yes, there's a spirituality that's nurturing, that's lovely. There's times in which our religious structure has brought people together. My Katrina experience, where we took care of hundreds of evacuees through our hotel, was incredibly supported by the local churches, and we couldn't have done what we did without their community outreach and their community resource. And it was amazing. And this is why I love confronting the line, because it's not all good and it's not all bad. And we got to have the courage to wade in and say, wow, this really works. Serves the greater good. This undermines it and
Well,
destroys
I'll
it.
give you an example of that. One of the things we teach in organizational transformation is decision-making models.
Mhm.
We say, I teach that there's 4 decision-making models: authoritarian, consensus, voting, and collaboration. And in every case, except consensus, not true in consensus, there's an accountable decision maker. But how they make the decision, how the decision gets made, is enormously important. And there are horses for courses. It's not that authoritarian decision making is bad. If the building's on fire, I want somebody to say, get out this way. Don't go that way. That's where the fire is. Go this way. That's authoritarian decision making.
Well, that
Consensus.
occurs to me as one of the places where this work gets used in ways that are detrimental, is when the wrong tool is used in the wrong place at the wrong time,
Exactly
right?
right.
So
So, for example,
that's really the danger. But we've got to learn. We first have to really understand our tool, and then 2, really be willing to examine both the helpful and harmful use, right?
exactly
So
right. So
yeah.
consensus, for example, when I worked in HP, in various parts of HP for a number of years, and I would ask people, what's the decision-making model here? Oh, it's consensus. No, it wasn't. It was consensus defaulting to authority. When they couldn't get to a decision by consensus, somebody just said the hell with it and made a decision. Voting. Useful in some aspects, but it tends to degenerate into politics. What people gave short shrift to often in the default culture of organizations is collaborative, where there is an authoritative, there's an accountable decision maker whose job it is to listen and learn from the people who are actually going to implement the decision, from the subject matter experts, from anybody who's got an idea, and then make the decision not based on their preference or their thinking, but based on what they learned. In a transformed organization, 90+% of decisions should be collaborative.
Interesting. Okay, this is why you and I are resonating, because I have a total obsession with collaboration. Oh, you defined really well what you say personal transformation looks right? That shift in locus of control, that shift from the confinement of, and those people, my landmark graduate friends out there listening, y'all will recognize this. This is what you resonated with in the programs. That is true, of all culty organizations. And yes, Landmark, I will say it now, in my view, is a cult. But
now everybody knows the answer to your book, and you're not going to steal anymore.
Well, it's really changed. It's actually changed in the last year as more and more information's come on board. I have a different view. Now, I also don't think that all cults are bad. I think that human beings are, as social interdependent animals, look up the word cult. It's like, what's challenging is it harmful or helpful? Is it, and the truth is it's usually both.
When people used to ask me if Landmark was a cult, I would tell them, no, a Jewish family is a cult.
So yeah, the more useful question is actually, is it helpful? Is it harmful? And what's helpful and what's harmful? That is actually the much more important question. So, but the shift from being confined to a view of myself that has these limits and barriers, right? That is mostly shaped by the way I survived. And that's got all kinds of varying degrees, to a wider lens, right? A wider lens on who I can be, what I can, and ultimately in the human potential movement, what you get to is you can invent who you are. Now, I'm kind of deep into picking some of those ideas apart, which is what actual learning looks like, as you go, let me look at that. Let me pull that apart and question that. So can you say simply what you would say organizational transformation is then?
Sure. It's got two parts. Recognizing that the culture of the organization is default. It's not the way it has to be. Okay, so recognize that there is a default culture that you are operating inside of, and designing the culture that will create greater possibility. A culture of engagement, a culture of collaboration, culture of high performance. So it's the shift from default culture, from culture by default to culture by design. And transformational leadership is leading within that culture, that designed culture.
Okay. All right. So sounds great, right? Sounds like, ideal. Sounds almost utopian, to be honest. And it's been said pretty frequently that organizations by default are sociopathic, that they don't actually care for or tend to the needs of individuals. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but that's a pretty common trope. And we're starting to see a kind of pushback against organizations now. In my opinion, that is because of enormous exploitation and abuses by organizations of people, of resources. So one of the resources is people, the resources of our planet, the resources of our communities. So how do you speak to that?
Sure.
Let
me ask you a question. If I said all Irish people are drunks,
well, I'd have a problem because I'm half Irish.
Well, are you a drunk? And yet you'll hear people say that. Organizations are sociopathic is a nonsense statement. It's a statement that has virtually zero meaning. Because, first of all, the diagnosis of sociopathy, which is a relatively new diagnosis, it used to be called psychopathy, is about people, individuals. It's not taking something that applies in one domain and putting it in another domain where it has no meaning.
Okay.
Organizations aren't anything. Organizations are what their culture designs them to be. So, for example, organizations are sociopathic. Well, then how do you account for Zappos, for
Mhm.
example, which demonstrably does care about people? How do you account for Nordstrom's, which demonstrably cares about its customers? Costco cares about its customers. I go into Costco. I've yet to return anything to Costco that they said no to. So
So
the
what
point
we
is,
yeah.
organizations aren't sociopathic. They're not benevolent. They're not, anything. They are one of the hardest things for people to understand in organizational consulting is if their organization is not performing the way they want it to, it's performing exactly as it's designed to perform. For example, I once worked with a consulting firm that started when they originated. I worked with them, they were 20 years old. The way they started was by taking over another consultant's client that they were failing with. Nothing unethical, nothing wrong, nothing, but just that's how they started. 20 years later, they're wondering how come all their business is coming from other consultants who are having trouble with clients who then bring them in. And why aren't they generating business of their own? Well, I said that. I said it earlier. As something begins, that's how it goes to the CEO of the firm, and he literally fell out of his chair.
Wow, you're explaining a lot of why since my book came out, I have heard from so many people across the lexicon of the Landmark Warner world and the ones associated with it, the other organizations. And that kind of burst out of the same mind dynamics, Silva mind control, Synanon, all that kind of 1960s
Wait,
counterculture.
don't lump mind dynamics and synonym in the same sentence.
Well, but I think they belong in the same they're in
They
that
don't.
same
They
era,
absolutely
very
don't.
incredibly different things, wildly different, but I'm saying the era in which they were kind of rising, and if you
Just to,
look at
to own my own bias, I have a very soft spot in my heart for Alexander Everett, who was the founder of Mind Dynamics.
he seems like he was a wonderful, human,
I got to
actually.
spend some time with him several days when he was visiting Werner, and I got to chauffeur him around and take care of him. And
How
he was
Werner
just,
treated him is
just such a sweet guy.
deplorable, both in
Our
outrageous
friend with
betrayal.
the new book does him dirty in that book, in my opinion.
Oh, you think so? Because I thought how she
Yeah,
represented him in that book was, they totally betrayed him. It was very consistent with Steve Pressman's accounting
yeah,
and
but
outrageous
Alexander
betrayal.
didn't feel that way.
He didn't feel when he gets brought together and they think they're gonna acknowledge the success of Mind Dynamics, which Werner was given the license to lead, and then he says instead, "Nope, I'm gonna break up with you, I'm gonna go create my own thing." You don't think he felt betrayed?
I don't know. I was not there when that happened, so I don't know. I do know that I spent 2 or 3 days in intimate conversation over meals with Alexander, and he never betrayed any resentment, anything.
Wow. Well, that's a testament to the kind of man he was. So I think but I want to go back to this thing you're saying about an organization isn't inherently good or bad, sociopathic or non-sociopathic, right? It is the leaders and people and culture of that organization that shapes the organization and its
Right.
existence, how it occurs, right? Okay,
Or
so
or not, or it's shaped by the default culture.
which is when you say default, that's why it goes so closely to its origins, right?
So closely to
Its origins, how it began.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, Ed,
Command and control is the default culture.
what the hell is wrong with Landmark? Why are they, excuse my French, fucking up transformation so much? Like, why are they 50 years later an organization that continues to exploit and abuse? Like, what the heck? And I kind of
1978
Mhm.
or 79, in an article in the Graduate Review called The Transformation of Est,
Mhm.
Werner wrote the following: evil is when an institution is more committed to its own survival than it is to its purpose.
Interesting. So does that posit then that an organization, whether it's Landmark or Costco or whatever, organizing principle is its own survival, whether recognized or not? Because I think, and I personally, I don't know, push back on me if this isn't accurate because I'm not that educated in it, but the whole stock market thing, I think, has been complete poison in the sense that the stock market became, I don't know if it started out this way, but it became, put a pressure on organizations that they always have to expand. They always have to earn more. They have to grow, 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 right? And that's
That's
unsustainable.
You're on the right track, but you're missing Milton Friedman.
Okay.
It isn't the stock market.
Okay.
Friedman said something that became Holy Writ, which is that corporations exist to make money for their shareholders,
So that's the
not for
corruption.
not for the good of their employees, not for their customers, not for service, that they exist for the shareholders. And that's how come there's a stock market.
So
Friedman didn't
that's the
make that up. He
corrosive.
crystallized it because there had been a New York Stock Exchange started back in the 1700s. It had been around for 200 years when Friedman said that. But he crystallized why
Right.
there's a stock market.
Yeah, I
Why
read that
would
paper.
think about it?
Yeah.
Why would people trade shares of a company? It's to make more money for themselves. It's got
Mhm.
nothing to do with the company.
Right.
So the whole basis of the stock market, I believe, is corrupt.
Okay. Gotcha.
And to your point, it mitigates against risk. And there is no transformation without risk. One of the reasons there's a butterfly on the cover of my book is because transformation, as I say in the book, is messy. It's inherently messy. When a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, they go through a total destruction of their physical integrity and a reconstitution as a butterfly. Caterpillars don't grow wings.
So why is it then, so organizations, and again, I'm just referring to Landmark because it's where I spent 26 years. So it's where I have
And if you
direct
notice, I'm
experience.
purposely making it more
Wider. Yeah.
general than that because I think by Werner's own definition, Landmark is evil. I think Landmark is more committed to its own survival. And the people who run Landmark, the Rosenberg family, and a few others, are more committed to holding their jobs and making sure they're making money
And
than
they
they are
don't think
to what
that.
the organization's all about.
And I think that happens in organizations as well. So this is where this interesting thing comes into play, which is what I would call, to use Landmark language, the pretense, which is we're an organization that is about, every organization a while ago, whatever point you'd know better than me, got all into having this vision and mission statements and these altruistic things and et cetera, et cetera. And mostly they occur for me as total bullshit. But when you meet the people in charge, they do actually believe this. Like, I don't think they're bad people for the most part.
No,
There's certainly bad
look,
people in there,
I
here
think
and
there are
there.
very few bad people. You can't talk about bad people for 5 minutes before you talk about Hitler. So yeah, okay, I'll allow that there are bad
Well, those
people.
are
I
sick
happen to
people.
think there are several of them
Yeah.
on the world stage right now.
Yeah.
But most people are not. Look, Dan Pink wrote a book called Drive. It's about intrinsic motivation. And he said that if you take money off the table, if you're making an adequate amount of money, people are motivated by three things: purpose, autonomy, and mastery.
Mm. Yeah.
To the extent. So when I started out in the consulting business, if you talk to people about purpose or vision or mission, they looked at you cross-eyed. They had no
Mm.
idea what you were talking about, unless it was like a nonprofit or a church or something like that. But business organizations, no idea what you're doing. Now, as you said, everybody's talking about it. But still, there's a difference between, and this is a huge piece of organizational transformation. It's why I call my book From Potential to Practice. If an organization lives its purpose, vision, mission, values, and that's a package, by the way. You can't have any one of those without the others and be effective. If it lives its vision, mission, values, purpose as a practice versus it's on our website and we hang it on the wall. And
Yes.
in one company, I asked if people in the organization were aware of the organization's vision. And they said, oh, sure they are. I said, how do you know? And they showed me it's on the back of their name badge. Well, how often do you look at the back of your name badge, for God's sake? So
Well, it has to get embedded in
it's
the
organizational
practices.
transformation in a nutshell right there. And I hadn't thought about it this way before. If an organization designs its purpose, vision, mission, values, and lives them as a practice, which means for a long period of time, it's going to be messy as hell because they're going to keep falling back. In my book, one of the sections of the last chapters is it's an uneven battle.
Mm-hmm.
Because the default, if I hit under your kneecap with a little hammer, your foot will kick. Well, you can learn not to do that. Okay, but it takes a lot of time and it's very difficult and probably not worth it. And this is true for individuals, their survival strategy will keep coming up. They'll keep screwing up. And that's why in the organizational work, we emphasize cleanups as especially important because you will step on people's toes.
Right.
And it's not, you shouldn't step on people's toes. It's how do you handle it when you do? And one of my mottos in working with organizations is this is an art of correction, not perfection.
Well, so hang on, I want to tune in on this practices piece a bit, because this is to me where organizations like Landmark have failed. So Landmark, I've been through at least 4 reinventions. They completely reinvent themselves and they come out with new blah, 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 blah.
There have been at least 10.
Yeah. And yet, but I've continually been struck by, especially the more as I've learned about the time before my participation, which was before 1995, I'm like, it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. And to me, it's because this adherence to certain practices, I also think they haven't upgraded their distinctions, their technology, because they stay too tightly to the Werner world. Werner doesn't even stay as tight as they do. Honestly, I've spent enough time with Werner that I would say in his defense, they've quite mucked up a bunch of his thing. And I love that you quote him in saying what an evil in an organization is. But the practices that's really interesting.
I don't want to be the guy who attacks Landmark, okay?
Yeah.
But you're bringing it up, so let me ask you a question. You were intimately involved with Landmark for what, 10 years?
No, 95 or 96 to 2012, whatever that is. What is
Okay,
that?
7 years. What are Landmark's top 3 values, cultural values?
3 cultural values. Well, gosh, I'm not quite sure how to answer that. So, because the first thing that comes to mind, so I'm just going to play with what comes. So the first thing is transformation, right? Is ongoing, but I don't even know what that means. But I feel like that's what I would have said as part of that organization.
No, organizationally.
Oh,
Transformation
registration.
is their product.
Okay. To an extent, participation, engagement in order to get registration. And then I would say there is something about growth and development or whatnot, but it falls very flat because it never goes deep, right? It stays.
So fundamentally, the only thing you've said that has any meat to it is registration.
Registration. And everything is organized towards registration. Like everything, every program, everything. Like to me, that's the corrosive force. I always wanted
what's the purpose of registration?
Money, make money.
And what's the purpose of the money?
Well, hang on. So make money, but for many years, and this is what I was taught and what I said in introductions way back when, part of why the forum for so many years stayed around the $500 mark was because they wanted to also, I heard it from Harry at one point, world domination. They wanted to literally sort of infect the world with their ideology, with their distinctions and ideas.
That's not anything they practiced.
Wow, that's interesting because as a person involved, I would say that's all I practiced.
You're equating having registration all over the world
Mhm.
with having a dominant idea.
Right. Right.
Landmark,
Absolutely.
in practice, would work with experts and then turn what the experts did to their own purposes rather than learn from the experts.
And do you see that in other organizations? Is that a
To some
common
extent, but let me go
foible,
back
if
to
you
the
will?
point I'm making.
Yeah.
If the purpose of registration is making money
Okay.
and maybe world
And
domination, I don't care.
existing, like you said, its own existence, right? Without
It's
registration, it can't
survival.
exist.
It comes down to survival.
Yes. Okay. Gotcha. Very interesting. And
So,
you would argue if it can't, if it doesn't exist, I mean, I heard this in many tables around that I sat on, senior tables. If we don't exist, we can't transform the world. So you can't,
well, there's a
existence
whole
gets
lot of
tied
assumptions in that.
a
First of all, that it's
whole
possible
bunch.
to transform the world.
Right. The world even
Second of all,
needs
this world
transformation.
needs to be transformed.
Right.
Third of all, if we don't exist, we won't be able to transform the world. That's true. That's also true if somebody dies. It's like
Right.
Martin Luther King died and yet his ideas lived on. The perennial philosophy, the idea of humans as beings has been around for thousands of years, and it will be around after Landmark, I guarantee it. So are you committed to the idea or your own survival? It keeps coming back to
But it's so good what you're saying, Ed, because that is part of the deconstruction process once you leave an organization like that, any high control organization, whether it's a religion or a group like Landmark or Amway or Juice Plus or like whatever,
you mentioned religion a number of times. Let me say something about that.
separating that. But hang on, but it's what I just saw. I just want to codify it in my own thinking before I go past, but is because as I've gotten clearer and clearer that the world does not need saving. The world is the world and the world's going to world on, did before me and it will after me. And that I don't have, the more I've separated the egoic aspect, in other words, my view of it from the mission itself, the much more liberated I am. So now I'm just like, well, okay, what am I going to do today? Well, I'm going to have a conversation with Ed and we're going to broadcast it on YouTube and some people will hear it and we're going to do some courses and some programs. I'm going to light up a platform that's dedicated to safer, more ethical approach to personal development, blah, 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 blah. So those are just things I'm doing now because they're interesting to me and they make use of what I've been given. Honestly, that's kind of how it is for me now. But the world doesn't need it anymore. So that's interesting, that separation of my survival from
Okay.
the mission. Anyway, that
Yeah,
was
you
like
see,
a moment.
first of all, when you say the world doesn't need it,
Hmm.
define the world.
I would say when I think of the world, I think of basically the role of human beings in the world, in
Okay,
society, and on the
so
planet.
so good. So we're not talking about oceans and mountains, cities and farms. We're talking about people.
People and how people impact those things is included.
There's a lot of question about that. But anyhow, we can't, as an individual, you can't affect those things.
No, not really.
Okay. What can you affect?
I can affect whether my dogs get dinner. I can affect, to a degree, I can affect my own wellness and well-being. I can
Let me
affect
t- let me
my
tell you a
house. I
story.
can affect,
I'm
like,
interrupting. Let me tell you a story.
yeah.
About a year ago, I realized that my consulting practice was way too dependent on referrals and that I had never had the opportunity because I was always working, flying somebody else's flag and
Yeah.
using their constructs. I'd never had the opportunity to really express what I felt I had dedicated my life to.
Mm,
Okay.
okay. Hmm.
Then my son, Eric, whom you know,
Mm-hmm.
send me a note. Send me this. Have you read this book? And the book is behind you. Okay. So I read the book and I thought, wait a minute, there's something, this individual is onto something. I need to learn from her because she and our experiences are so close, so parallel.
Parallel,
I
yeah.
know there's something I need to learn from her. So I
Mhm.
called you, and
Mhm.
you and I have been collaborating ever since.
Right.
And I've learned a tremendous amount.
First and foremost in our own learning. Like that's the
That's right,
yes, we're doing projects together, but it's our learning that's been, for
right,
me
and I've
anyway, juicy.
transformed how I do business in my practice because you're one of the best sales and marketing people I've ever met. You're not just that, but you are that. So and I've taken that on as a commitment. You and I are doing programs together, including one we're finishing up next week. So you, just by virtue of being who you are and putting who you are into practice, because I don't think, aside from maybe myself, I don't think I've ever met anybody who has a higher core value of learning than you do. So
Yes.
you're in there with Glenn
Sometimes to
Gore, you're
my
in there
own detriment, but
with Chris Shelton, you're in there with me, you're in there, man, you don't care. You look at the world and you see opportunities for learning.
right.
You don't see people, you don't see, I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah. No, it's hence why I've dedicated my Illuminate life to being a learning hub, right?
Right,
Like,
exactly. So my
right.
point is
Yeah.
this: if I look at you, and I know your background, I know your story, I know the whole teen mom thing, everything else. But if I look at you, that's not what I see. What I see is someone who's dedicated herself to learning and being and fostering learning in other people. You talk to people that I couldn't bear to talk to for 15 minutes, and you talk to them for hours
Yeah, because they're
because you,
fascinating. Ed, they're so
even more than
fascinating.
me, have this value of learning and you put it into practice. You are a transformed being who practices learning, engagement, listening, all the values of personal transformation. That's what you can do.
Yeah.
See,
That's why I haven't given up. Yeah.
many years ago, somebody, I can't think of his name now, he's very well known, and I'm just blocking on his name, made a video about paradigms. It was one of the first things that came out about paradigms that was really understandable. And he told a story that now everybody knows about the guy walking on the beach with the starfish. And you, more than most people I know, exemplify, save that one, not look at all these starfish. What can I do? In Buddhism, there's a tradition called the Bodhisattva vows.
Mm,
And the vow of a bodhisattva starts with sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. And the bodhisattva renounces rebirth until all sentient beings are saved. Okay, now, how do they do that? One being at a time, one starfish at a time. Save that.
right.
So when you
Right.
say organizations are sociopathic, I reject that. And there are organizations that would fill that category. For me, tobacco companies.
That's what I was going to ask you. How do you feel about organizations that do things, either have practices that are destructive or overly extractive, which is mostly how they destruct, right? They're overly
Okay, well,
extracting resource, or they're putting a product in that is harmful. How do we hold
those are
that?
two very different several different
They
things.
are, yeah.
I will not work with tobacco companies, I will not work with firearms companies. I don't care how much money they offer me unless the work they wanna do is to get out of the business,
Gotcha. Okay.
okay? And stop immediately producing what they're producing. Now, nobody's gonna do that, so that's ridiculous. I have worked a big part of my career is I've worked in mining. Copper, gold, oil, but I've worked with companies that are committed to doing those things in the least harmful way possible,
Right.
okay? And my work with them is on being more effective at doing those things in the least harmful way possible. If a mining company came to me, and some have, who were just raping the earth, I won't work with them.
Well, and you point to something too. A mining company like that is unlikely to seek out an Ed Gurowitz or an Ann
That's right.
Peterson
It's
or
pretty
whatever, right?
self-selected.
Yeah, which is why, like, I'm putting out there what I'm about, why I'm hosting this show, why I'm talking about the dark side isn't because I love the dark side. It's because I'm committed to the safe and ethical practice of personal development and wellness. That's just it. It's really that. And that lifelong learn. I mean, really, ultimately, as you pointed out, my commitment is to lifelong learners, that inherent aspect of who we
But
are as
yeah,
human beings. So,
you're committed to both, though. That's what's interesting. And this is something I've learned from you. To be frank with you, except in the case of specifics, Jim Jones, Landmark,
yeah.
Waco, I've never thought about the safe and ethical practice of personal transformation.
Well, because we assume it. That's what's been the
I
shocking
don't
thing.
no, I didn't assume it. I knew that there was exploitation. Look, I work I saw the stuff that you talk about in your book.
Like, my girlfriend always accuses me of rainbows, unicorns, and puppies are my
Right. So
this is
so
true.
it's not that I didn't know there was unsafe or unethical practice. I just kind of never thought about that as my own values include safety and ethics.
Uh-huh. Okay,
Okay.
good.
But I never thought about what you're doing with Illuminate and with what's the organization?
Seek safely.
Yeah, Seek Safely. Those are things that never occurred to me. I've learned an enormous amount from that and have committed myself to that by virtue of my association with you.
Right.
So
You added a wonderful chapter in your
Bucky
book.
Fuller asked a question. He said, "What can the little individual do that no one else can do?" And the answer is make a difference one starfish at a time. That's not his answer, that's my answer.
Yeah, and I love, I asked Chris Shelton to do a show on responsibility because I knew that that was an idea that had been quite twisted in the lexicon of personal development. And, and particularly when the manifestation wave came into being, right? So, and I love the way, he took it apart and he dived in and said, responsibility is that which I have the ability to respond to. And that has been, I call myself a recovering codependent. So as a recovering codependent, I do that all the time. And I've had to learn, and I'm still learning on a daily basis. I just had a conversation with a beautiful friend last night where I saw particularly where I had sort of overstepped my boundaries, her boundary, and encroached in her space by trying to be responsible for, in the name of being protective, in the name of being a good friend, in the name of being a mentor, whatever. It doesn't matter what your rationalization is. But I had really encroached into her territory and tried to be responsible where I couldn't. I've done the same with my daughter, to her detriment.
Well, what do you mean you couldn't be responsible?
Well, I can't be responsible for her. My job is not her choices.
That's true, but you can still respond. See,
I can
to give credit
respond
where
if
credit's due, Fritz
she asks,
Bowles
for sure.
originally said that responsibility means the ability to respond.
Hmm.
For me, there's a big difference between responsibility and accountability.
Sure. Okay.
Responsibility, I have the ability to respond to lots of things, but it's not necessarily like you with your friend. It's not necessarily appropriate
Right. Or
or
healthy.
within my purpose or within my values to respond to that. In fact, it may be detrimental to them.
And another piece that I bring in is healthy. Is it healthy? And when I say healthy, I'm talking about physically, emotionally,
Yeah, I
spiritually,
agree with that
mentally,
too.
not
But
just
accountability are the things I've promised
hmm.
to make happen. Can count on responsibility is the ability to respond. Accountability is the ability to be counted on.
Okay, but how do we avoid the slippery slope, Ed, of if I say I'm accountable for every person coming to know Jesus Christ as their personal savior, right? I'm just
You
picking up
can't
on
make
that one
that
from my
promise.
childhood.
That's an
But
invalid promise.
how is that different than what you just said as accountability?
What
I know friends who have said themselves to be accountable for
I
peace in
know,
the
and they
Middle
don't
East.
understand what accountability is. Now, I can
Okay,
be
so tell me the difference.
responsible for that
I can respond to happenings, meaning like I
one
want to,
starfish at a time. Okay? I can't promise that because I can't physically be in communication with every individual on the planet.
so if accountability is what I give a promise for, my promises would need to be related to what I can respond to functionally.
That's the relationship, exactly.
Okay.
So in the beginning of the Hunger Project, which I consider to be one of the more successful things to come out of
Me too.
Landmark,
Me too.
we said, I am responsible for the end of hunger on the planet. Now, I promised to do the following. I promised to write to my congressman. I promised to do this and that. Okay. Joan Holmes said, I promised to run the Hunger Project. Okay. I can be responsible for something, and then I'm accountable for what I can be counted on to do. I can't be counted on to end hunger.
But you can be counted on to write your congressman.
That's right.
And you can be, a lot of people forget that when that came to being, and whatever Werner's motivations and stuff are, we don't know any of that.
I have no
It's
idea.
not any of our, we can,
It was,
I know, but I'm
there
just
was a lot
honoring
of
that because there'll be,
socialists at that time that I can't find any nefarious motive
yeah.
behind. The Hunger Project, the Breakthrough Project, the Prison Project.
Oh, I can. Have you read the S Prison Papers? Really good. Anyway,
The what?
so I can definitely find nefarious
I've
things,
had
but
you send
we'll
it to me.
save
I
that
haven't
for
read
a different show. The Est Prison
Okay.
Project has there's a 126-page paper about it. But the thing is, a lot of people forget about something like the Hunger Project. At the time, it was the general belief was that the reason for hunger is not enough food. And one of the things that people who dedicated themselves to responding to hunger and serving that in their lives, one of my very best friends was the global CEO of the Hunger Project up until 2020. And she and I have been doing some projects together. So I happen to know a lot more about the Hunger Project in its current iteration than I did in its previous. But at the time it was, it was about shifting a conversation about the nature of hunger itself so that we could begin to take more appropriate actions. That was one of the more...
Yes, but not primarily. In the beginning, it was primarily about creating the political will.
Right.
So
To
you know what
actually
we
take it
did?
on.
We went to the mall in Burlington, Vermont, and my son Eric, who was like 5 at the time, and we handed out cards to people and said, would you sign this and endorse the Hunger Project? That's all, and thousands of people did that all over the country, all the time, every weekend. And ultimately, now that opens a conversation called, but there isn't enough food. Yeah, actually, yeah, there is. And if you go back, if you can get your hands on the original Hunger Project source document that Joan Holmes wrote,
I have it, I think.
it is one of the most brilliant pieces of work I've ever seen because it pointed to two things: what needed to be transformed and that it was transformable. And we showed that it was transformable because the conversation called "There's Not Enough Food" died in about 10 years.
Right. And the Hunger Project today does amazing work. It's, and they've just recently open sourced their methodology. So primarily the Hunger Project is organized around education, building leadership skills, building, honestly, the exact same stuff that you're talking about and that you're doing, and I'm now working with you to do in organization.
Yeah, it's practices.
I wanted today to be a little bit of a trip on the light side, a trip onto the light side of the line. Like, where is it? Millions of people have gotten involved in transformational methodologies in one iteration or another, right? Whether personal, organizational, whatever. Why? Because there's stuff here worth pursuing. There's stuff here that makes a difference. And I think it's beautiful that we're kind of coming to an end on the evolution of the Hunger Project, because to me, the Hunger Project is a demonstration of what most of the people that participated in the S training, insight, all these things, they did come with an authentic desire to make a difference, and they have used their life in service of that. And I think I don't want that ever to get lost in the mix. And, my commitment is that we learn the lessons of what we have available to us now. We've got 50 years of being engaged in this kind of work and technology. And there's a lot of people who have done amazing, amazing things because they're amazing people.
That's
They
right.
are amazing people. It's not the work. It's not the tool. Stop conflating yourself with the tool. Stop conflating yourself with your political party. Stop conflating yourself with your religious belief. No, those are all tools and accesses for learning and growing and acting and moving and practicing. get clear. What are your personal values? What are you about? You've always lived it probably anyway, and
And
use your tools in
one
service.
other thing.
Yeah.
You remember a movie some years ago called The Ed Show?
The Ed Show?
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
Jim
I'm a
Carrey.
movie buff.
It's this guy who lives in a
Did you say
TV
Jim Carrey?
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
lives in a TV show. His life
Yes.
is a TV show, and at the end, he actually climbs up to what's not the sky, but a set, and opens the door and sees there's something on the other side.
Mm,
Human Alice in Wonderland, you name it. You said it very well. Human beings are social, interactional. We're also aspirational. Human beings are aspirational critters. We know there's something better. You know,
that's right.
it's an old joke about a woman that takes her two kids to a psychiatrist and says, "This one's a terrible pessimist. Never sees anything good in anything. This was a terrible optimist. He only sees good, never sees anything bad." Psychiatrist says, "Well, we have to test them." And he puts them each in a room full of horse shit. They come back an hour later, puts the optimist in a room full of horse shit, puts the pessimist in a room with a pony. Because back an hour later, the pessimist sitting on one side of the room, the pony's on the other side of the room. He says, "Why aren't you playing with the pony?" "Oh, you're just going to take it away anyhow."
Mm,
Then they go to the room where the optimist is, and he's digging in the horse shit and throwing it all around. He says, "What are you doing? Why are you digging it?" He says, "Look, with all this shit, there's got to be a pony in here someplace." Human beings are that kid. We're enculturated out of our optimism. We're enculturated into fatalism. We're enculturated into pessimism. We're enculturated into, or we're
mhm,
enculturated into that there's that somebody else has the answers,
right.
whether it's Werner or Jesus or, I don't care, or Trump,
Teacher or mom or dad
I
or
don't care
yeah.
who it is, because our parents do have all the answers. We learn, not through any fault of our parents, not through any fault of our own, we learn that somebody's got the answers. I just have to get them to tell me. You get past all that,
Or I have
and
to get
human
on their
beings
team.
break through into a world of, dare I say, a world of possibility.
Wow. Well, thank you, Ed. You always part of what I've delighted in our conversations together is I get a sense of what brought me into the work of transformation in the first place, which is it
Me too.
matched my desire that I've had since as a little girl that we can, we're great. We can do better. We can, and I don't mean do better to say how we're doing is
No,
bad,
be
even.
better. We can be
Be
better.
better, do better. Well, I think we can do better too. But the whole,
Well, no, if you be better, you'll do better.
yeah, well, hopefully.
See,
So,
that's the message of transformation, is that doing follows being, not the other way
mhm,
around.
right, as long as it's an authentic, as it's a real creation, right? Like we're living right now in a world of so much pretense and artifice.
Oh,
It's
yeah, no,
it's
but
a
that's
little
not
hard to
being, that's
see.
pretense. That's pretending.
Well, in part because we have all these tools that allow it to do it, right? I can.
Read
They say
read,
one of the
read E. Cummings' Letter to a Young Poet.
Thank you, folks. We'll put in the show notes a bunch of links to the different things Ed and I are doing. We've mentioned a lot here. I've really delighted in doing your book club, where we've taken your book chapter by chapter and a group of just really fun people and dug into it and questioned and pushed and twisted. And Ed and I have both learned in that process. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you, Ed. You are indeed a lifelong learner.
Thank you.
And I love it. So we're going to be making that available, the recordings of it. We may or may not do it again. So we'll make sure to include in the show notes ways for people to sign up. Basically, folks, if you want to know what we're up to, get yourself on the Illuminate Life mailing list, because that's where you're going to both hear about things, but also I'm very committed to putting out newsletters and things that are just purely
Newsletter
for
alone is
learning.
worth the price of admission.
So thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.
And until we meet again for Conversations with Ed.
Pleasure.